And when Jesus had cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And having said thus, he gave up the ghost. Today we come to the last statement of our series on the 7 statements from the cross. I've got Brother Jeremiah on hold. I asked the weeping prophet for a little help in preaching today, and I hope you don't mind before I close if I bring Jeremiah up to testify before the end of this message. My sisters and brothers, we've seen an array of theological truths that have the power to transform our lives unfolded here tonight. We've seen Christ asking the Father to forgive the very people who at the time were mocking him and had beat and mistreat him. A forgiveness that wasn't dependent upon the remorse of others. We've seen Jesus give the gift of eternal life to a thief on the cross, as in the last hours of his life he turned to Christ and asked him to remember him. And Jesus said, today you will be with me in paradise. It shows us that no matter what you've done and no matter what hour it is, if you turn to Christ with true repentance in your heart, it's never too late. Matter of fact, you ought to testify to somebody next to you and tell them it's not too late for you. We've seen Jesus in the pain and the agony of the cross take time to entrust his mother to his beloved friend and disciple John. We've heard the agony in the voice of Christ at the moment that he took the sins of the world upon himself and was separated from his Father, Pastor Hightower, when he cried, my God, why have you forsaken me? He endured that separation from his Father so we would not have to. I won't go through them all, but all of them have brought tremendous truths to our lives. But today, as we come to the close of the sayings of Christ, here we find the Word quoting the Word. Some of y'all didn't get that. Some of you get it when you go home. For in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. The same was in the beginning. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. And here we have the Word quoting the Word. For our text, Luke 23 and 46, is a quotation of Psalm 31 and 5 with one word added, and that is the word Father. That verse was the prayer that every Jewish mother taught her child to say the last thing at night before they went to bed. Just like we've taught many of our children to say, now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. So the Jewish mother taught her child to say this before the threatening dark came down. Into thy hands I commit my spirit. Jesus made it even more significant, for he began this particular prayer with the word Father. Notice, if you will, that even on the cross, Jesus died like a child falling asleep in his Father's arms. Now I want you to notice something once again in this passage. Christ goes back to saying Father. He started out, Father, forgive them. But at some point in time, he got separated from God, and God was no longer Father. So by the time he got around to Pastor Hightower's message, he didn't call him Father, he called him my God. My God. You see, when Christ said, my God, he was separated from the Father. But by the time he got around to Minister Roberson's word, when he said, it is finished, it really was finished. The price had been paid, and it was at this point that fellowship with his Father had been restored. And in that fellowship, we see Christ now changing back to that relationship and entrusting his spirit into his Father's hands as he gave it up. Sisters and brothers, first of all, I want to tell you that a father's hands are trustworthy. Oh yeah, the Father's hands are trustworthy. Christ had no problem putting his spirit in his Father's hand because he knew there were no better hands than his Father's hands, and he knew that he could totally trust his Father. Oh, the touch of a father's hand. What son, what daughter does not long to reach out and embrace their father? There's something wonderful about this expression, Archbishop. It speaks of safety. I'm safe in my Father's hand. For 15 hours, Jesus had been in the hands of wicked men. And with their hands, they beat him. With their hands, they slapped him. With their hands, they abused him. With their hands, they crowned him with a crown of thorns. With their hands, they ripped out his beard. With their hands, they smashed him black and blue. With their hands, they whipped his back until it was torn to bits. But all that's behind him now. For wicked hands have done all that they can do. And Jesus now returns into his Father's hand. And I want somebody to know tonight that God is holding out his hands saying, won't you put your life in my hands? You can trust me. And some of you may ask, well, Pastor, you know, I've seen people who have entrusted their life into the hands of God and bad things still happen to them like they do everybody else. And that's true. When we entrust our lives to the hand of God, it doesn't mean that we won't have bad things happen to us. For this world is full of tragedy, and Christians aren't exempt from tragedy. But we have a God who gives us the strength we need, and a God who promises us in Romans 8:28, all things work together for good to them that love God and are called according to his purpose. That means even when we have a tragedy that strikes our life, that God can take the tragedy and God can still turn it into something good. Sisters and brothers, he said, Father, in your hands I commit my spirit. I commit. That word means to deposit something valuable in a safe place. It's what you do when you go to the bank and put your money there. It's what you do when you go to your safe deposit box and put your valuables there. You commit. What is it that I commit? I commit my spirit. By this phrase, Jesus meant his very life, his personal existence. Now that his physical life was over, Jesus committed himself into his Father's hands for safekeeping. Father, I can no longer care for myself, so I'm placing myself in your good hands for safekeeping. So on the cross, as his life is ebbing away, Jesus reverts to the prayer of his childhood. The prayer his mama taught him back in Nazareth. The prayer with which he ended each day. In the end, his strength gone, his body tortured almost beyond recognition. His mind recalls the words that he learned as a little boy. Father, in your hands I commit, I paratheke, I entrust, I give to you my spirit. Well, I got to get out of here, but let me call Brother Jeremiah to testify to you tonight. Jeremiah would tell you in the 18th chapter and the first 6 verses, he said, this is the word that came to me. Go down to the potter's house, and there I will give you my message. So I went down to the potter's house, and I saw him working at the wheel. But the pot he was shaping from the clay was marred in his hands. So the potter formed it into another pot, shaping it as seemed best to him. Then the word of the Lord came to me. He said, can I not do with you, Israel, as this potter does? Like clay in the hands of the potter, so are ye in my hand. And Jeremiah just wants you to know there are 4 little things that happen when you're in the Father's hands. Jeremiah knew years before what Jesus found out at the cross, that there's something happened when you put your spirit in the Lord's hand. First of all, the fire that the potter uses removes impurities. In other words, there's some stuff about me that nobody else can see. Do I have any honest people in the house that will say I'm nasty, that will say I got a bad attitude? You don't have to tell your neighbor, but you know within yourself there's some impure things in me and in you, and God sees it because God is the potter. He loves you too much to leave you where you are and to leave you like that, and you can't worship it off. You can't tap it off. Come on. You can't shout it away. You can't dance it off. Come on. There's some stuff that God's got to take you through the fire for. God's got to burn some stuff off of you because you would never let it go unless God took you through the fire. And there's somebody who's going through, even as Jesus went through on that cross, and God just wants you to know you had to go through this stuff because you would have never left that brother alone unless he drove you crazy. You would have never left that sister alone until she almost made you kill yourself and half the block. Come on. You would have never stopped drinking had you not had that accident. You would have never stopped selling drugs had you not gone through jail. God had to take you through the fire. Second thing Jeremiah wants you to know is that when God takes you and puts you in his hand, God hardens the vessel. Where you going, Pastor Swan? You see, once God brings you into the promise, the enemy comes at you. But when God hardens you, when God takes you through the process and hardens you, when the devil comes at you, you can tell the devil you're going to have to come with more than that now. You came with that last year, but I've been through the fire since last year, and my vessel is a little harder. Come on here. I'm harder than I was then. I can take a little more than I used to be able to take. I can take this cross now. People used to say some dumb stuff, and I used to go off and start crying. Friends used to walk away, and it used to mess me up. Enemies and foes used to lie on me. But guess what? I found out that God favored me. Oh, I wish I had somebody in the house tonight. The third thing that Jeremiah wants you to know is that the potter not only takes you through the fire and hardens the vessel, but then the potter beautifies the vessel. And I know some of y'all think you're cute right now, and you think you look good right now, but you haven't seen the finished product yet. There's some stuff that went down in your life that was ugly, and mama said something that messed you up, and daddy mistreated you, and folk made you feel like you were ugly, and folk made you feel like you were nothing. But when God get through with me, I shall come forth, my God, as pure gold. And then the final thing that Jeremiah wants you to know of what happens when you get in the Lord's hands is that fire lightens the vessel. In other words, how many of you can say that I was dark? I was a messed up individual. There was no light about me. I didn't even like myself. But after what God brought me through, oh baby, I like what I look like today. Hey. I like where God has brought me today. I just came by here on my way to heaven to tell you one thing that Jesus tried to tell you when he gave you that last word on Calvary. Would you look at your neighbor and tell your neighbor, I'm in his hand? Hey, I don't know about you, but I'm glad that I'm in the Lord's hand. Everything that I am, everything that I be, I'm in the Lord's hand. And if you're in the Lord's hand, can't nobody pluck you out of his hands. I'm safe in the arms of Jesus, safe and secure from all alarm, and the world can't do me no harm. Just tap your neighbor and say you're in his hands. with some problems, with some burdens, with some trials, with some tribulation, and you've been trying to work it out. I just can't